We're going to start with a discussion question, so you can keep chatting, but if you'll direct your conversation to the question on the board. The question is, why is it the case that sometimes it's hard for us to talk about money, particularly in the context of Christians talking about this in Bible class or sermons or conversations? Why can it be so hard for us, difficult for us, that is, to talk about our money and how it is that we should be using it? So discuss that amongst yourselves for a couple minutes and prime the pump for our study tonight. Okay, real quickly, don't want to spend a ton of time on this. Maybe shout out some things. Why can't it be difficult for us to have the conversation about money in church or in Bible class? Nick?
Well, I think if they have all things in common. They're in Acts. Nowadays, we tend to have less all in common going on. Where now it's more, people don't want to talk about money. People don't want to talk about need, even though we do see the need and we do have the money. It's just,
okay.
It's an awkward discussion.
Okay, it can be awkward. Thank you, Nick. What else? Why? That's what we're getting to. It is hard to talk about it. Why is it hard to talk about it? Different people have different amounts of money. That's a real factor, sensitive kind of thing as we talk about it together. What else? Thank you, John. Tom?
We're ashamed that we don't have a whole lot.
We could be ashamed that we don't have a whole lot. Thank you, Tom. What else? Robert? We don't recognize the fact that it's God's money and we're just stewards. Albert?
Secular world tells us to go for it, live the gusto. The secular world also tells us it's nobody's business. And so it's just a common influence in our day-to-day lives from the worldly standpoint. Is like, we don't talk about that.
Okay, it's not none of your business, we might say. Thank you, Albert, to use the kind of thinking of the world. And so we may think that even when it comes to the Bible, our responsibility as disciples, that all of this stuff that we're doing in studying the Bible and in church has nothing to do with my pocketbook, nothing to do with my money. Okay, it's personal. And there are some sensitivities with that. There's also some protectiveness that we may have about that. So I engage in that kind of opening discussion question just so that we can kind of clear the air a little bit and just ask us to have an honest ear and an honest conversation about these things, and to think humbly and lovingly together about these things. It is somewhat personal, so I'm not going to presume to know either your finances or your heart or your personal habits. That's not the implication that I'm trying to make in any way in this class. But I know that we live in a culture that is, as Albert said, very much inundated with a certain way of thinking about money and using money. Yeah, thank you, Michael. And there's more handouts on the back. If you didn't get one, you can raise your hand and Michael can bring you one. But our culture is very much infected with a certain way of thinking about and viewing our money. I know personally I have been, and I think all of us would say, that we've been affected by that to some degree, and so we want to have this conversation. This is in the midst of a class on spiritual formation. In particular, each week over the last several weeks, we've been looking at a different spiritual discipline or two. And the disciplines, remember, are practices. They are exercises. And we've been using that analogy of athletics or training, among other things, musical training as well, where practice helps you to build muscle, right? So think about that tonight. Practice helps you to build muscle. The more you do it, the easier it becomes or the better you get at it. Also, I think in one of the emails this quarter, I've used the illustration of muscle memory, okay? That's another thing that happens, especially in like musical training, where you practice the same thing over and over and over again, and you build muscle memory to where you react instinctively the way that you're supposed to act. And that's especially true, I think, with something like money, that we engage in these disciplines or these practices of simplicity and generosity. We'll talk about what those are in a second. And it builds kind of new pathways of thinking about our money, of using our money, so that it becomes easier to use our money in the way God would want us to, because we're not only building the muscle and the willingness to use it the right way, but also that muscle memory to know how it should be used and to do that instinctively. Because the goal of these disciplines is to grow into the kind of person that would do as Jesus did and do as Jesus taught. Transformation into Christ-likeness. So we are talking about money tonight, and there's two disciplines that we're talking about. You see these at the top of your worksheet, your handout. And let me define them or describe them, and we're going to kind of talk about both of them at the same time. There are points where we'll differentiate, but you'll see that they go together, and so we'll talk about them kind of in tandem here. Simplicity is a way of describing the discipline of intentionally getting by with less, right? So simplifying your life, you might think of it that way. But getting by with fewer, or you might say simpler possessions, in order to, again, it's a discipline, so it's in order to grow in our contentment, as well as prepare ourselves to better seek the kingdom of God by kind of decluttering our lives of possessions, right? Or the complexity of possessions, okay? This may sound like something that's fairly trendy nowadays called minimalism. There's points of overlap, I guess, with the secular idea of minimalism, but this is not that. Minimalism is often driven by a very selfish sort of motive, whether that's personal happiness or greater productivity, okay? Also, minimalism can have other kind of motivations like, the environment or smaller footprint or things like that. But this is not really minimalism, and hopefully you'll see the difference as we go. But it is a way of viewing our money and our possessions differently and seeking to live a simpler life for the purposes, again, of being more like Jesus. And then the other discipline that goes along with this is the discipline of generosity, which is maybe easier to grasp or a more familiar term. This is the habit or the exercise of giving our money away and sharing our stuff so that we can be a blessing and a help to other people. So, simplicity and generosity. We're going to spend a lot of time looking at one passage in particular in the book of Luke. You can be turning to Luke chapter 12. This is in the left-hand column of the next section, learning from the Master, the third passage down, Luke chapter 12. As I mentioned in the email, Jesus himself talks a lot about money. Again, depending on how you want to categorize the subject of his teaching in any given verse, and then if you wanted to break it down and graph it, Jesus talks about money basically as much as any other topic, maybe save one. And then there's just a lot of stories that involve Jesus and people, again, with the parables he told as well, that relate to money, wealth, and possession. So it's a big topic to Jesus, and there's no way anything we do tonight is just going to scratch the surface of Jesus' teaching, and we're not even really including other teaching in the Bible on this subject. But in a class on being disciples of Jesus, I think it's important to sit at his feet and learn from him. So just as a quick kind of summary of the other passages, Luke 7 and verse 33 and 34 is the passage where Jesus says of himself that he came eating and drinking with people. That is, living a life in which he enjoyed the pleasures of life. And he was criticized for that, of course, just like John was criticized for being a wilderness ascetic. But it shows us that Jesus was not anti-pleasure. He was not anti-life's comforts. He was not anti-anything that was enjoyable. Okay? He was not one of these monks that lived in the wilderness and never ate and never enjoyed a mattress or something like that. Okay? In fact, in the next chapter, chapter 8, verse 1 to 3, it says that Jesus had a number of women, some of them clearly wealthy women, that financially supported his ministry. And again, there was enough money in Jesus' ministry that they needed a treasurer, Judas, to kind of manage the funds. And he was apparently able to steal from it without it going noticed for a while. So they had funds that they were using. And maybe along those lines, the passage in Luke 9, where Jesus says, if you're going to follow me, understand that the foxes have holes, birds of the air have nests, the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. And then in chapter 10, he sends out his disciples to preach, and as they go, they're not supposed to take a whole bunch of stuff with them. But similar to his own ministry, how are they going to be provided for? How are they going to eat? Yeah, people would provide for them out of their generosity and their hospitality, okay? So again, these are kind of specific instances. I'm not saying that, we have to model our lives exactly after the limited commission or anything like that, but you do just see this idea that Jesus and his disciples, money, finances, the pleasures of life, they were something that they used in their ministry. They enjoyed these things. They used them for the ultimate purpose of the work that they were given to do, but they were not controlled by them, right? They used them for God's purposes, but they were not mastered by them, and they did not hoard them up. I think would be the basic idea from it. Well, let's look at this passage here in Luke chapter 12. Maybe a volunteer. I think we do have a microphone, so someone who wants to read aloud Luke 12, verse 13 to 34, a little bit of a longer reading. Volunteer to do that? Thank you, Lee. Go ahead.
Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." But he said to him, "Man, who made me a judge or arbitrator over you?" And he said to them, "Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." And he told them a parable, saying, "The land of a rich man produced plentifully. And he thought to himself, 'What shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops.' And he said, 'I will do this. I will tear down my barns and build larger ones. And there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, be merry.' But God said to him, 'Fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God.' And he said to his disciples, 'Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat, nor about your body, what you will put on. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens, they neither reap nor sow, they have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than the birds? And which of you, being anxious, can add a single hour to his span of life? If then you are not able to do as small a thing as that, why are you anxious about the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass, which is alive in the field today, and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, O you of little faith? And do not seek what you are to eat or what you are to drink, nor be worried, for all the nations of the world seek after these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, seek his kingdom, and these things will be added to you. Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the needy. Provide yourselves with money bags that do not grow old, with a treasure in the heavens that does not fail, where no thief approaches and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also."
Thank you, Lee. Okay, we've thought some in this class about the idea of healing, right? So let's use that terminology here in this passage that Lee read for us in Luke 12. Let's think in terms of the diseases, right? The sicknesses that Jesus is identifying when it comes to ourselves and money. And then we'll talk about the cures that Jesus instructs us in this passage here. So what are, because I think there's more than one, what are the diseases that Jesus talks about in relation to our money or our possessions? Okay, relying on money as opposed to relying on God. Thank you, Dan. What else would you say about the diseases diagnosed here in Luke 12? Hoarding. Thank you, John. Did you say the same thing? Okay, so we have anxiety, worrying about these things. The eating, drinking, I think, is a symbol of of our stuff, right? Covetousness, right? Another word for that, shorter word, greed, right? Covetousness, greed, depending on your translation. Nick? Not giving God the glory. Okay. That's Michael.
Idolatry.
Idolatry. Now, I didn't see that word in the text, so I have to explain that one a little bit here.
Where your treasure is,
Where your treasure
there
is,
your heart will be also.
there your heart will be also.
So if
Verse
you treasure
34.
that more than God, then it's an idol.
So it's interesting, Jesus, this is kind of a flow of conversation here. It begins with the question asked by the guy, right? My brother's not dividing the inheritance with me. And Jesus says, who made me your judge or arbitrator? And from that, it's interesting, his answer is not, okay, let me set this record straight on the inheritance. He says, I need to offer you a warning here against every kind of covetousness or greed, is that word in verse 15. Be on guard against every form of greed, covetousness. This is simply just the desire for more, right? The unhealthy desire for more. That's what greed is, what covetousness is. And Jesus says to beware of it because life is not all about what you have. It's not all about your possessions. By the way, Albert mentioned this earlier. I mentioned it as well. I think this is one of those verses where we have to just be very honest about the very different messaging that we have in our culture, right? In either very explicit ways or implicit ways. I've actually forgotten by now the movie, but there's the famous speech in the movie about how greed is good, right? Someone who knows that movie reference. I watched the clip the other day, but I forgot what it was from. But that's kind of become an American mantra, right? Greed is good, keeps the engines of economy going, right? But Jesus says, watch out, right? Greed is idolatry in the language of Colossians 3. But Jesus also says life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. Have you turned on the TV? Well, you don't have to turn on the TV anymore for commercials. They're everywhere. Every ad is about the fact that life does, in fact, consist in what you have or what you wear, right? That's what life is all about. And Jesus is challenging not only the notions of our day, the notions of their day as well. And so he tells the story about greed and the man who hoards up possessions for himself with no reliance on God, no view towards eternity, building up barns to store up more stuff, right? More storage units, more bank accounts to have all the stuff kind of stored away that he has. No inclination, right? That all of it could come to an end at any point, and he needs to be prepared for what's beyond that. So greed, hoarding, with no view for eternity. But also we've talked about anxiety because Jesus kind of weaves seamlessly into a conversation about worrying in verse 22. For this reason I say, do not worry about your life, eating and drinking. And he talks about the ravens and the lilies and what they wear and what they eat. And I want us to see that anxiety over money is really the same basic sickness. It's the same root cause as greed, right? Both of them are this grasping for more, okay? The greedy person is just piling up more or trying to pile up more. The person who's anxious about money is still grasping, right? Because they're not content with what they've been given. They're not trusting in God to provide. And I think that right there, that lack of contentment, that lack of trust in God the provider is at the root of both the greedy and the one who's anxious about possessions. So, what's the cure? Those are the diseases. Covetousness, which is idolatry, greed, anxiety over money. What's the cure that Jesus instructs us here? What are the cures here? Seek first his kingdom, verse 31. These things will be added to you. Good. What else?
Keeping in mind what is fair, what is equitable, those terms and perspective of what you're due versus what you're.
Thank you, Albert. Perspective. Consider the lilies is a command that Jesus gave. So we need to do it, right? What What else would you say? We have seek first, we have consider perspective. Go Robert and then Tom here. Help others, keep what you need to live your life. Robert's referring to verse 33. Sell your possessions, Jesus says, and give to charity. Tom?
Give, and it shall be given unto you. I don't
Get-
know where.
Give and it will be given to you. Yeah, that's actually in Luke, I think earlier. That's that funny passage about shaken and stirred and pressed down and whatever. Not to make Jesus sound too much like James Bond, but he says, no, it's not have to find it because you guys are just totally confused. Luke 6:38, give and it will be given to you. They will pour into your lap a good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. See, I wasn't crazy there. For by your standard of measure, it will be measured to you in return. Okay, given it will be given. Thank you, Tom. Michael?
Whenever I read or remember the scriptures where he talks about, consider the birds of the air, the ravens, and observe the lilies of the field, I'm reminded of God's faithfulness and how he provides. That's what he's trying to say. Hey, God provides for the animals. He's going to provide for you. So you're reminded, like that's part of the cure, is remembering who God is and what he does, and that he's in control, and he is good, and he is love, and he's faithful.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. So we have this perspective change. So I think at the heart of it, and this was even in our definition of simplicity, at the heart of it is this great command found here in Luke 12, also found, of course, in Matthew 6:33, in the same similar context. Seek first the kingdom of God. He will provide. You see how that's just a complete perspective shift. Okay, the world and everything that Jesus has been describing up to this point is focused first on gain and enjoyment of pleasures, the stockpiling of possessions, the grasping for more. Whether you have a lot or a little, again, Jesus says that doesn't make a difference. If you're anxious or you're greedy, your focus is on what you don't have and what you're trying to get. Jesus says your focus should be on the kingdom of God, doing the will of God. And part of that is submitting and trusting in his faithfulness and thinking about the ravens, the lilies, the perspective that God will take care of us because we are his children. So my main concern is not what I have or what I don't have or what I would like. It is on God and doing his will. Now, that's all a kind of nice kind of Bible class idea and a kind of a big picture concept. And it is, I think, the foundational issue. But Jesus actually gives us then some tangible things to do that will move us in this direction. What does it look like to seek first the kingdom, trusting in God to provide? Well, again, verse 33, as was mentioned, Robert mentioned this. Jesus says, sell your possessions and give to charity. Make yourselves money belts which do not wear out, an unfailing treasure in heaven where no thief comes nor moth destroys. I think we need to take this seriously. And I think part of what's going on is that it's easy to say, yes, my perspective is eternal. Yes, I don't trust in what I have. Yes, I'm not anxious. I trust that God will provide. And Jesus is saying something like, put your money where your mouth is, right? That's what we would say. But it's if you really trust that God's going to take care of you, if I really trust that God's going to provide for me, if I seek first his kingdom, then I need to live in that trust by opening my hand and giving generously, kind of getting rid of what I have to be a blessing to other people. Terry, you want in on this?
Yes. What is also echoed in the Old Testament concerning the feast days and the way the Israelites were told how to take care of what God has given them, because if they kept the feast days and if they kept the the keeping of the land the way he wanted, he will bless them in more ways than could ever imagine. But they didn't. And that was what happened with Judah and the going away into captivity for 70 years with the Babylonians and so forth.
Yeah. Thank you, Terry. And maybe what Terry said, if you want to come back later on to 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, Paul's kind of instruction to the Corinthian church about giving to help the needy saints in Jerusalem, Paul uses a lot of that kind of Old Testament thinking about the Sabbath and about the way God took care of Israel to say it's the same way today. God's going to take care of you. You'll be fine, okay? And in fact, there's actually kind of this abundance that will be poured out on you if you will give with liberality so that you'll be equipped to do even more good work, Paul says. So that's another conversation, but thank you for pointing us in that direction. You see that the actual giving of our stuff is a way to put into practice, to use our terminology this quarter, put into practice the trust and the perspective and the reliance on God, the seeking first of the kingdom. Okay? Because, verse 34, Jesus says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. You've heard it in sermons and Bible classes before. Our credit card statements, or whatever it is you want to look at now, Venmo feed, or whatever it is, our checkbooks, we used to say, reveal more about us than almost anything. How are we using our money? Okay? Where is our treasure? And so, putting all these verses together, if we're seeking first the kingdom of God, trusting for Him to provide, then that will make itself evident in the way that we use our money. Okay? Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And that's kind of the essence. I have a slide on it, but we're not going to have time to look at Luke chapter 16. That's the next verse in your set there on your handout. Luke 16 is that weird parable of the dishonest manager. And basically the idea of that parable is that the manager had a window of opportunity before he was going to be gone. And so he used his opportunity. He used what was available to him to make friends for himself, make preparation so that when his time was up, he would be taken care of. And Jesus uses what may seem to us kind of like a crass illustration there to say, you've been given money. He's very clear about that in the parable. You've been given, really what is not yours, as Robert mentioned earlier, I think. You've been given money to steward that. Use your money for eternal purposes so that when your time comes to an end, you will be secure in your eternal fate. It's the basic idea of that parable, okay? Jesus says God is trusting us with our money and our possessions now. And if we use it well, then He'll entrust us with the eternal riches in the age to come, which is a cool thought. But again, it's this idea of what we've been given is not ours, and so it's incumbent on us to use it for God's purposes, for eternal purposes, and not simply for ourselves. That's Luke 16 in a nutshell, I think. And interestingly, at the end of that parable, it says that Jesus was talking about this because the Pharisees were lovers of money, and they like to justify themselves. Aren't we the same way? Either we look at our wealth and use that as a justification. Look, I must be doing okay because God is blessing me with this. Or we find ways to justify ourselves in order to continue in our greedy lifestyle. Okay? All right. Let's say a few things about why this is needed. We've kind of tried to do that with these disciplines, and hopefully these things are obvious. And I'm using here "we" in the most general sense, okay? But using the language of Luke chapter 8 and verse 14, this is the parable of the sower. And you'll remember that the thorny ground is the place where the people heard the word, and the word actually grew in people's lives, but it was choked out by something. And Jesus says in Luke 8:14 that the thorns that choked out the word are worries and riches and pleasures of this life. And so riches and pleasures, riches is one of the things that Jesus says is a threat to our spiritual fruitfulness. Okay, and therefore a threat to our spiritual soul, our souls in general, right? And so think about this image of, okay, if riches are among the thorns that choke out the word in our lives, well, then let's put our gloves on, get down in there, and start pulling out some thorns so that our spiritual lives have room to grow and mature to fruitfulness. Okay, so what we, in a very general sense, societal or us as a group, however you want to think of this, okay, there's a real problem with greed. Again, American mantra, greed is good, always wanting more. Apparently shopping has in the modern time become the number one leisure activity in America, shopping. And I'm sure that's just skyrocketed with online shopping. It's like that's what we do in our spare time is we get on Amazon or on Target or whatever, on Etsy, and we're looking for something to buy, okay? Again, every commercial is preaching this gospel, but this is just the way we operate. The new phone comes out, we have to get it. Our car is 2 years old, we got to get a new one, okay? We've been in our house for a few years, right? We need a bigger one. This is just the way that society, again, on the whole, operates, and we so easily get sucked into this constant desire for more, okay? And the kind of constant accumulation of more leads to a distractedness in our lives, right? I mean, even just thinking about the practicalities of it, when you get more, you have more stuff to occupy your attention, right? Again, just operating in kind of a standard American way of doing things, more gadgets, right? TVs, devices, and so they're around the house, and so they take up the video games, all the stuff that we bought with our money fills up our houses literally, and we're on them, or we're paying attention to them, okay? And I remember John making this point in invitation ages ago, about there's this principle of like buying nice stuff and then you have to like upkeep all the nice stuff, right? So you have a boat, you got to upkeep the boat. You know, you have a vacation home, you got to upkeep the vacation home, and all that costs money and time, and it kind of gets you more sucked in. And so I would say even in what we would think of as modest means, we have more stuff we got more stuff to take care of. Bigger house, more rooms to clean, okay? More stuff to think about, keep track of, more subscriptions to manage, right? So on and so forth. And all of this is not helping and probably hurting our problem that we talk about quite a bit in our world of anxiety, okay? And Jesus, of course, is getting at that. More money, more problems, as one wise person has said. But these days, especially, because we live in a world where you don't actually have to have the money to get it, okay? Nowadays, we've flipped it to where you get the stuff and then you say you're going to pay for it later, right? So you get the degree and then you're stuck with loans. You get the house and then you're stuck with a mortgage. You get the car or two cars and then you got the car payment, right? You get all the gadgets, but they're on a payment plan. You buy all the furniture, but they're on the credit card. And then now what have you done to yourself? You've loaded yourself up with that debt, which is a constant source of anxiety, a strain on marriages, and a serious problem, which, of course, as you know, the Bible has things to say about. And so in our greed, we have driven ourselves not only to distraction, but to more anxiety. And so Jesus says, again, bottom line, we need to seek first the kingdom of God. All these things that we've talked about, whether it's the distracted enjoyment of all of our stuff, or whether it's the anxiety of keeping up to have enough to pay for it, okay, or keeping up our standard of living, all these things here are keeping us from living this life that is devoted to the reign of God, doing God's will. And as we've been talking about, it takes us out of this eternal perspective of God's provision, God's care for us, keeps us from being able to enjoy that peace and that joy that comes from knowing that God will take care of it and take care of us because we're too busy scrambling to keep up the rat race, so to speak, right? Okay, I'm going to pause here. Any comments or questions here before we move on to maybe some final practical suggestions here? Let me know. I'm off base. What am I missing here? Questions, objections, concerns? John?
I think one of the first comments was we don't view it as a blessing, or that maybe that's ours. And, Malachi really hammers on this, that when you withhold tithing, you're robbing from God. And, these elements come out where a father wants to give good gifts. He says, just test me. See that I won't make your coffers overflow. And part of that is that we don't, maybe it's an element of trust that we've talked about, but also that we just don't recognize it as a blessing, and therefore we don't give the gratitude to what it's due, and that's probably at the root of a lot of these issues.
Yeah. Thank you, John. Other thoughts, questions? Lee.
Luke talks about in Luke 18, or Jesus talks about in Luke 18, about the rich young ruler. And when we talk about it here, it seems, oh, well, that should be simple. It's hard, and Jesus recognizes that it's hard. And the disciples seem to think it's impossible.
Yeah.
That could be us, too, because our inclination is to worry and to hoard and to try to take care of ourselves. And I don't know if that's strictly an American thing or probably not. But I think we need to recognize that, it's easy to talk about on Wednesday night. It's hard to do on Thursday morning.
That's right. Amen. Yeah, thank you, Lee. Oh, Terry. It's coming, Terry. Just go ahead, Terry.
Okay. It's just like this. When the Jews were with the Israelites, were told to follow follow the land in the days of rest, and then the seventh week, the seventh year when the land was resting, that God is still going to bless them. There's not going to be a lack of anything, because He's going to take care of and bless for all of the work that they did in the 6 years, or the six, the whole idea of the seventh day being the day of rest. And He's going to make sure that they are taken care of, that they are blessed with the produce that was to come. They'll be even putting back and storing up some of those blessings.
Yeah. Thank you, Terry. And that reminds me of what John said, right? That God is just asking us to trust. And in several of these passages, and again, go read 2 Corinthians 8 and 9, because Paul is drawing on these very principles of the Old Testament to say, if you would just trust God enough to give, and to give with liberality, He's waiting to bless you, right? And to what Terry said, to what John says, we're too miserly, right? We're too anxious. We're too tight-fisted on our stuff, and so it's like we're not letting go of it, and we're also then not receiving the blessings that God has given us, because we're kind of clenching on too tightly to what we have, what we think we have, when really, again, it's not really ours to begin with. Okay, real quickly, Stephen, I want to finish this off here.
Here in the United States are very good as it relates to throwing our money at a problem. And I think that's a good thing. And I think we should give up what we've been given to help other people. But I think there's a service part to that too. And that's not about money, that's about time. And so I want to be sure that we distinguish between those two things. Just giving your money is a good thing. That's not a bad thing. But your time is valuable as well, and that should be given in service to others.
Thank you, Steve. And I'm glad you brought that up. I did put those two passages under learning from the teacher. Mark 10, the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give His life as a ransom for many. And then John 13, of course, the story of Jesus washing His feet. So I'm glad you brought that up, Steve, because I intended to touch on that. That yes, we're talking about generosity, not just of our money, although that is the focus here, but generosity of spirit, generosity of time, generosity of giving of ourselves and our effort to serve other people. So thank you for that. Okay, some practical suggestions of what this can look like, to Lee's point, to make it easier maybe Thursday morning. Eliminate clutter. I think this is just a helpful practice to go through and to clear out things, just to, get a stock of what we have, to clean things out, simplify our spaces. But also clutter even in your account, right? Go through all your subscriptions that you have for streaming services and, clear some of them out, right? You're eliminating clutter in your life to make some space in your budget or in your house, right? To be able to focus a little bit better on what you want to focus on and on enjoying the blessings that God has given you, okay? Limiting consumption, or I could say putting hard boundaries on consumption, right? Stop impulse buying, right? Again, this is just for practice. This is building muscle, right? So whatever it is, the next thing you're about to click buy, don't do it. And wait at 24 hours, right? Amazon can still have it in your house, right? And just 24 hours later or less. But just stop yourself, right? Start practicing the saying no and hitting the brakes. Give yourself time to space and think. Ask the hard questions that we're supposed to ask about our need, our budget, the sustainability of it, the motivation behind buying it, all those kinds of things. So put hard boundaries on our consumption. We kind of stop that impulse buying habit, which so many of us have, okay? Enjoy the simple things would be kind of the third point under simplicity. Remember, that's what, to Albert's point on perspective, that's what Jesus is pointing us to with the birds and the lilies, right? They're provided for in a very simple way. And yet they rely on the Lord. And so we don't need more to be happy. In fact, I think we understand it's kind of the opposite, right? We just have to be thankful and grateful for what God has given us. And that is the secret to joy, not the accumulation of more or the next thing or the newer thing. So enjoy what God has given. Enjoy the simple things in life. Again, Jesus himself talks about it, but the practice of giving things away and blessing other people with the stuff that maybe hurts to part ways with, whether it's money or possessions, but it's good for us. It's good for us to practice that muscle, okay? Of relinquishing our hold on something that's important to us, relinquishing our hold on some of our money so that other people can be blessed. Budgeting I think is a big deal when it comes to both simplicity and generosity. Maybe sometimes we feel like we're not able to be generous because there may legitimately not be money left over. But oftentimes if we just go back and kind of work through our budget and cut out things that are unnecessary spending, we will be surprised how much we can free up and be able to use. And so budgeting that aside every month to say, this is my contribution, but this is also money I'm setting aside just to be able to help people and to give. And we'll say more about this in the announcements because obviously this is a very generous church and that should be celebrated. But with ways to do better at it or to start it if you haven't, budgeting is a good place. And then I believe it was Nick that mentioned the example of the Christians in the book of Acts. But doing what we can each personally to live out that picture in Acts chapter 2, where they lived with generous and hospitable hearts towards one another, and they shared their table. Have someone over, whether you feel like you have a big house or a small house or somewhere in between. Have someone over. Share your table with people. And the more we do that, the more we'll, again, build that muscle and get comfortable sharing not only our money, but as Steve said, our time and our life with our brothers and sisters in Christ, and it'll be a blessing to them. So, thank you for considering these things with me tonight, and we'll wrap up our class on spiritual formation next Wednesday. Thank you, guys.